So we're looking at Philippians chapter 1, and we know from the overview video that we will have watched from the Bible Project that Paul is the writer of this letter, and he's writing to the church at Philippi, which is called Philippians. And in this first section we see Paul praying and thanking God for the Philippian church because they bring him joy. And why do they bring him joy? They bring him joy because of their partnership with him in the gospel from the first day until now. They are his friends. They are the ones who have supported him and cared for him. And just in between this little section, we see one of the most wonderful promises of God. And if you have a Bible, highlight it, for it says, "I am sure of this, that he who began a good work in you will bring it to completion at the day of Jesus Christ." This is a promise of God. You know, we often feel like failures. We can often feel weak, and we can often wonder if we're going to make it. But we know that when God begins a good work in us, he brings it to completion. God is the one that carries through when we can't. And so he continues on and he says, you are dear to my heart. I hold you in my heart. Why? Because they are partakers, which is another word for partners with me in the grace, both in my imprisonment and this is the key verse here, the defence and the confirmation of the gospel. Paul is interested, and we're going to see this again and again, in the gospel, in the defence, the spreading, the confirmation of the gospel. And he's so thankful to the Philippian church for helping him to do that. And so then what he does is he goes on and he begins to pray for them. And he begins to really pray. It says, my prayer is that, what is his prayer? That their love may abound more and more. So he wants them to grow in love. And why does he want them to grow in love? So that we may approve what is excellent. So that, another so here, we may be pure and blameless. You see, God wants us to grow in love and in discernment and in knowledge, that we might become holy, that we might live lives that are right before God. Because holiness leads to fruit. Here it says we are filled with the fruit of righteousness that comes through Jesus Christ. And so his prayer is that they would grow in love, that they would become more holy, and that they would produce the fruits of righteousness. That's his prayer for them. And then he moves on into this section to talk about his imprisonment. So he's talking about what's happened to me is he is stuck in prison and he knows that he might die. But he's not worried about that. Why? Because his imprisonment has served the advance of the gospel. And in fact, his imprisonment has made other people more confident in the Lord, so that they are now more bold to speak the word without fear. You see, Paul is interested again and again in the spread of the gospel. And as we're facing today COVID-19, the coronavirus, we can be seeking to see the expanse of the gospel, and hopefully it's making us more bold as people ask questions about, why is this happening? What happens when we die? Why are we so mortal and fragile? We have the answer to those questions in the gospel. And I want to move us down now to talk about this section about living for Christ, because his great desire is that Christ is proclaimed. But why is he so desperate for Christ to be proclaimed? We start to see the answers here. And he is saying in this section that he is not worried about whether he is going to live or die. And why is he not worried about whether his imprisonment might lead to life or death? He says this, and this is again one of the most wonderful scriptures in the Bible. For me to live is Christ, and to die is gain. What an amazing thought. For Paul, he didn't mind if he lived or if he died. It was either okay with him either way. For him, it was a win-win situation. Because to live is to live for Jesus, to see the gospel go forward, and to die is to go to be with Jesus and to live in heaven. And we are faced with exactly the same choice. You know, we don't know what our future holds, right? When we're faced with things like COVID-19, right, we need to realise that it doesn't matter. We are also in a win-win situation, because we can either live for Jesus and the gospel and spread it, or we die and we go to be with him. Paul says actually his desire, right, he'd rather go to be with Jesus, but he needs to remain in the flesh. Why? For the sake of the church, because he wants them to go on with God. And so he finishes in this section here talking about, again, what? The gospel of Christ. And he says, let your life, the manner of life, the way you live your life, be worthy of the gospel. So whether I'm with you or I'm not with you, as a whole church, you are standing firm in one spirit. You are in one mind, striving side by side for the faith. And so that's what we're doing by doing this Bible reading team together. We are striving side by side for what? For the faith of the gospel. And we are not frightened, are we? We're not afraid of anything. We're not afraid of the coronavirus. We're not afraid of anything else. We're not afraid of the enemy. Why? Because we know that we are called to live for the gospel of Christ, to live for Jesus. To live is Christ.